Right, everyone. That's why I was getting involved in the funky groove that's going on behind me, which is quite good. Welcome back. Welcome back to the main hall here. So hopefully all of you that are sat here now are here because you want to listen to what Dr. William Bird, MBE, has to say to us this afternoon. If not, just to remind you, there are a couple of other things going on. And Ian Duffy talking about fitness in the Sherman Suite, and Professor Anne Hemingway and Harriet Laurie talking about the horse course in the Education Suite. But we'll skip past that because I'm sure you're all here to hear what William has got to say. So welcome back. Hope everyone had a good lunch. Now into the afternoon. William's got a difficult job of the after lunch slot to keeping you all awake and occupied and entertained, which I'm sure he'll do a wonderful job of. So let me now introduce Dr. William Bird, MBE, who's the CEO and founder of Intelligent Health, and he's going to talk about nature and mental health. Over to you, William.
Great, thanks very much indeed, and you've definitely made the right choice, of course, coming here. So I'm going to take you on a journey of your body and how we interact with nature, and hopefully you'll come away from this a very, very different person than when you started, because there's a lot going on about the nature connection with us as human beings, and it's become very much more more flavor. I was just on a part of the government's advisory group on social prescribing for green social prescribing. So £10 million has just been put in to get green social prescribing set up in 7 areas, and the Treasury said that would be going right across the NHS very soon. So that's a massive change just in such a short period of time. So our factory settings when we were created as hunter-gatherers were about 200,000 years old. And there are 3 things that keep us going. One is that we have to belong. The second is that we have to have a place where we feel we're going to be safe. And nature really comes into that. But not just that. Wherever you are in a family, wherever you are at work, you've got to feel safe. Because once we stop feeling safe, I'll tell you what happens. And having purpose. Everyone talks about happiness. But happiness is very much for the moment. It's an important thing. Purpose is your guide. That's what really gives you that fulfillment of life, having a purpose. So although happiness is almost a side effect of that, I think we'll find lots more energy now going into about purpose and feeling valued. That's it. So I'm a GP. I could just tell everyone that's all they have to do, and they'll all get better. Very, very simple, just 3 things. And let's have a look at what happens if we get those 3 things right. We get resilience. So if you feel you're really safe and you belong and you've got purpose, then you will automatically start to eat the right things, you will sleep well, and actually you've got more capacity in your mind to be active and doing other things. And that gives you energy, fulfillment, and direction. So your whole body changes, and we'll go through why that happens. Let's go back then to who we are and why we're different from other animals. Because do they all have that same thing? Well, actually they do. But for a wildebeest, that gets up running after 15 minutes of being born. If it didn't, it would die because it will get a lion onto it. How long does it take for a human being to start running? Well, they start walking. We started walking probably at 1, and we're doing a little trip over about 15 months instead of 15 minutes. And that's because a wildebeest's brain is hardwired. It's brilliant in East Africa. It knows exactly what it's doing. But you put a wildebeest in Milton Keynes, and it would struggle. It wouldn't know where to go or what to do. Mind you, if I put you in East Africa, you might struggle to start with. But what mankind has done is that we don't just have a hardwired brain. Our brain is half hardwired and half brand new. It's got an open book. And we create the rest of that part of the brain as we go through life. And if you've had bad experiences in your life, that will leave imprints on your brain. And those imprints stay with you until you try and get post-traumatic stress disorder, problems as a child, neglect, not feeling loved, feeling insecure, being told you're fat, being told you're too thin, being told you're ugly, being told you're beautiful. All of those things all help shape our brain. And then we constantly iterate on how we get on. And that's really important for what we're going to talk about. Because we need to feel safe, as we've said, and that is kind of our ideal environment. That's for 200,000 years, and go way back. You've got light, you've got green, you've got shelter, you've probably got food, and you've got water. That's St. James's Park, by the way. When they designed parks, they really knew what they were doing. They made parks exactly where our brains hit the sweet spot of shelter, of water, of greenery. And as a hunter-gatherer, that is where you want to be. So you want as much reward in your body to ensure that you, as a living species, stay exactly there. And that's why the hardwired part of us does that. You have a house and you overlook a car park, or you have a house and overlooks that, what are you going to pay more money for? Well, it's obvious, isn't it? You pay more money because you're looking at that. Why? It doesn't make any difference. The car park doesn't affect you. Might have a few kids around in the night causing problems when they're doing screechy wheelies, but otherwise, there's no practical reason why that is any different. And yet we'll spend £100,000 more just to get that. Something in our brain is totally hardwired to say, that is where I want to be. So that's the hardwired bit. That's our new environment, and that's not where we wanted to be. We adapt to it, but as you can see, there's a mismatch from where we want to be to where we are. Now, we can adapt and live there, and many of us have to live in places which aren't ideal. But what it means is that the brain is slightly under stress because it's desperately trying to relocate back again to where the hardwired bit is. Oops, sorry about that. So you can see that the new environment is now shifted away as we've become in 21st century, and the area of mismatch is actually stressful for us. We adapt because we've got that bit of brain that's still adapting, but we've still got that hardwired bit that said, this is not where I want to be. But that middle bit, where you can combine the new environment and nature and pull them together, is where our bodies actually can work. And that's the bit we have to focus on. Just a bit of evidence. If you have children who climb trees and are outdoors and you match them exactly with their socioeconomic group, their age, their education status, their family upbringing, everything else, put them all the same, they will have bigger hippocampuses than children who don't live in a rural area. The hippocampus is the center of memory, of learning, and of behavior. It's really important. It's shaped like a seahorse, hence the word hippocampus, which is Latin for seahorse. Something in our body is telling us that's what we should be doing. If our brain gets bigger in the most important area for function, because we're just going in trees and playing out and outdoors, surely there must be something there that is hardwired to say we've got to keep going in that. So this is where things start to go wrong. You saw the housing estate there. We get loneliness. We get a hostile place, a place we don't feel safe in. It could be fear of crime. It could be a horrible house you're in with a family you don't want to be with. It might be a workplace problem. It could be just your general friends, etc. But that hostile, or it could just be that you feel you've got all concrete around you and there's no nature. And lack of control, lack of purpose, lack of direction in your life. That creates, what's the body going to do? It's going to sort of say, right, let's hit the red button and put fear and stress in there because I want to protect you, Mr. Body. My brain is saying to the rest of the body, I want to protect you. This is not good. Get out of here because you shouldn't be here. You should be somewhere where it's safe. So our bodies immediately go into a stress mode to try and get us out of this bad situation because this is not good for our health. And that chronic stress and that loneliness and all of those problems of fear then change our behavior. And it says, right, you're under stress, conserve energy. Number one thing, conserve energy. So I'm afraid there's no more extra energy for going to the gym or going for a run or doing other things. You haven't got any more energy left. Let's conserve it. Let's make you eat as much fat as you can. So our appetite changes. Let's conserve that fat and not let it go. Hence we get obesity. The poor bacteria, which we'll come to in a minute, in our gut, then all get completely disrupted because of this dreadful diet. So they start getting unhappy. And then we start doing things like smoking and drinking and gambling. Now, part of that is a numbing effect to get us out of this horrible position, and some of that is because we become impulsive. If a lion was about to jump at you, would you get out an Excel spreadsheet and work out the cost-benefit analysis of going to the left or to the right? No, you just say, right, jump. You don't think. So our brains, when we're stressed, go into impulsive mode for protection. Hence, we tend to do things we kind of regret later. So this is all the brain trying to help you. It's not being horrible to you. It's trying to protect you because we've got out of our comfort zone into this zone now where we're under threat. So that's another way of looking at it. We've got resilience has dropped down. We've got that weak resilience. Now stressful events, which normally we could cope with, start to really hit us, and we start getting chronic stress. And we get negative emotions of fear, of anxiety, because they're all there trying to protect us. Everything is innocent here. Everything is trying to make you feel safe and better. And we get adrenaline and corticosteroids. And the bit that really gets activated is called the amygdala, right at the bottom of the brain there. And that's your fear bit. That's the bit that really switches on the fear anxiety. And without it, you have no fear whatsoever, which you might think in some situations is pretty good. But actually, it just puts you into danger, and we wouldn't last very long as a species. That amygdala sends a message to the frontal part of the brain. That's our clever bit. That's the bit the wildebeast doesn't have, which we do have. And it sends out a fear, and the front bit of the brain says, hang on, what's this fear? Okay, forget it. It doesn't matter. And that fear drops down. And that's what normally happens. Every now and then, it's a real fear. So the frontal cortex, which takes a few milliseconds to work it all out, says, let it go. Yeah, be fearful. Be fearful. Your spouse is about to shout at you for something you've done wrong. Be fearful. Okay, those are the things where you have to start getting that anxiety, fear, and you start to really hype up. When you get chronic stress or chronic fear, and it's got no rational basis at all. So let's think of an example, silly example of a spider. A house spider does no damage whatsoever, but we're hardwired to actually not like spiders. The rational part of the brain says, do you know, that's just a spider, it's okay, but the amygdala says, this is really bad, this is really bad. So there's a tussle, and some people just can't cope, and other people can't see what the problem is. It depends on which part wins. When you get chronic anxiety, the link between the amygdala and the frontal cortex gets weaker and weaker and eventually stops. So the amygdala takes over. There's no frontal cortex anymore telling you that that fear is irrational. And this is what happens in post-traumatic stress disorder, that the fear coming out from the amygdala is no longer, the frontal cortex can no longer work out what's going on, and then the fears just come, and you don't know where it came from. Of course, it originated from certain things. So this is called the amygdala hijack, and it's taking over your brain. So this is how our brain works, and this is why if you let those fears flow and don't respond each time, you gradually build back that network, you gradually build back that connection. Anyway, this is about nature. So, very quickly, I've just mentioned we're conserving energy. When you get chronically stressed, our brain focuses on survival. Survival doesn't mean going to the gym. It doesn't mean going for a run. It might be for running away from something, but that's over and above what you normally do. It taking it over extra energy. When our brain tells us to eat high-calorie food, we crave crisps, we crave comfort food, and then it stores it, and there's a hormone called ghrelin that's a stress reactor that comes out and tells our brain to do all those things. So when you start to put on weight when you're stressed, you're not actually weak-willed, you're just doing what your brain is telling you and what the hormone ghrelin is telling you. Okay, so we've got all of those changes of emotions. Now we've got changes of behavior. Your sleep gets disrupted. Don't forget this hardwiring bit of nature. I'm trying to keep that theme going all the time. Then we get obesity and we get an unhealthy gut. That's the gut. When we talk about nature, we always think about it on the outside. We think about it as the birds and the trees and dogs and animals, all outside. We've got as many cells of bacteria in our body than we have cells of our own body. Okay, and 10 times the DNA in our total body is actually of bacteria. Those bacteria, without them, we'd be dead probably within a week or two. We would not be able to cope. Half the immune system comes from those bacteria. Almost all the dopamine and the serotonin that makes us feel good all comes from those bacteria. Those bacteria look after our gut. They digest things we can't do. They give us vitamins. They give us absolutely everything. Without those bacteria, we're nothing. Do we look after those bacteria? That's an ecosystem. There are thousands of different types. There are more different types than there are probably animals and birds and things in the whole of the United Kingdom. So there is nature inside us, and we're kind of in the middle. We've got nature inside us, and we've got nature outside us. And both of them, we're in the middle. We have to look after. We have to look after really carefully. Just to tell you what happens if you start eating rubbish food and start eating all these problems of fat, is that the bacteria can't keep all the nasty bits of bacteria in the gut, and they spill it out into the bloodstream, and that creates inflammation. So you get this sort of chronic inflammation. So if you don't look after your gut bacteria, you get what's called leaky gut. That can give you irritable bowel, inflammatory bowel disease, and then it leads on to everything else of diabetes, Alzheimer's, heart disease, stroke, everything else, I would say. So that's how important they are. Fat, if you get too fat, you energize all the immune system. That creates what's called chronic inflammation. So the fat cells just get too big for their own good. They can't keep. This is all the body trying to respond to you being stressed in the first place. So now we've got all of this going on, and we've got what's called chronic inflammation. Chronic inflammation is when the immune system is now turning into action because you're stressed, you've got fat globules are coming out, you've got bits of bacteria coming into your gut, and it's the basis of all those diseases. It's really, really important. If there's an epidemic in the world, it's this. It's chronic inflammation. Children who are really in a bad way, you start to see that starting already. So they're on their way to diabetes and heart disease well before we see it in your 40s or 50s. You can see it in children straight away who are inactive, overweight, and stressed. You also get short telomeres. The telomeres at the end of the gut chromosome, which I can come to a bit. And then there's the mitochondria. Okay, this is about nature, this bit. You didn't think I could be talking about some bit of nature that happened 1 billion years ago that now lives in you and runs you and organizes you completely and tells you how long you're going to live. Because that's what's called those little orange things. They're called mitochondria. And they were a little bacteria. It used to swim around in the sea, and it jumped into another bacteria 1 billion years ago, and that's how life formed, and we've still got them. They've got their own DNA. It's not even your own DNA. And that DNA comes from your mum. The bloke doesn't give any of that DNA to you. It's only the mum that produces the DNA in those mitochondria, which are separate from a mitochondria that you've got, DNA you've got in the nucleus. Those mitochondria tell us when the cell should die and when it should live. They can jump out of that cell and go into another cell if they don't like the look of this cell, if it's starting to die away. They give us all the energy that we have. 99.9% of all the energy in our body comes from those. They are so important. Some people think they actually run us all, and they're all bacteria with their own DNA still. So you could almost say they're kind of sort of semi-living in us. And inside that bacteria, if you sit doing nothing and you eat rubbish and you're stressed, the little mitochondria charges up as a battery. Okay, there it is. It's all charged up. What happens when you overcharge your mobile phone? Actually, not so much these days because they switch off. They used to get hot. So when you overcharge a battery, it gets hot. That's because electrons are leaking out of it. These electrons come out of an overcharged mitochondria, and that is called a free radical. So the free radicals are coming out from here because we're not doing anything and we're stressed. So don't forget, the lack of nature is now making us feel stressed, it's making us more inactive, and it's making us eat a lot more. The further you go from nature, the more the hardwired part of the brain sends out red signals. And right down to the cellular level, we start to see this problem of these free radicals coming out because you're not getting up and moving around. When you're active, low fat, not stressed, great, lots of antioxidants, more mitochondria, everything gets going, everything's back to normal, no free radicals. But what's happening is that those free radicals are going to your nucleus. Okay, this is the very engine room of every cell. This is the engine room of you. Right inside your chromosome here, there's a little cap, which is like a shoelace cap to stop it from fraying. Every time your cell divides, you lose a little bit of that telomere, that cap, and at some point it gets so short that cell can't divide anymore, so it dies. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is aging. Okay? There's a certain length of that telomere after which that cell can no longer divide. And then it doesn't get replaced, and therefore you get thinner skin, thinner heart, thinner muscles, thinner brain, thinner bone, because you get less reproductive. And just in case some of you are looking a bit smug, it starts at the age of 27, okay? From 27, it's downhill all the way. That's where there are more cells being lost than being maintained. So make the most of what you've got up to the 27. If you get free radicals, it accelerates the aging process. So you start to see those telomeres shortened because they're being damaged. Somehow these free radicals make a beeline to these telomeres, so you have less and less telomere left. Children from an abusive household who are really stressed start their life with short telomeres. So no wonder they can't catch up, although they can. You put a child who's had a really bad background into a more loving relationship where they become active and they start eating, there's a hormone called telomerase which slowly lengthens the telomere so you can catch up again. And physical activity is the most important one of the lot to do that. Okay, there we go. That's a bit there. So how do we, and that talks about all the problems. So you can see that no nature at the top there leads all the way down to all the diseases. Fatigue, cancers, dementia. And fatigue is there because your immune system is using up loads of energy trying to keep this inflammation going, which is harmless, this is hopeless. Green exercise, as opposed to going to the gym, makes your telomeres go longer. Okay? So physical activity makes your telomeres go longer, but green exercise makes them go even longer. More telomerase. So there's something about when you're outside in nature that's making all of this a lot better. That's an incredible sight. Children who play in the park a lot more with green space, their telomeres get longer. So when we go right down to the very, very basics of what's going on, nature seems to have an incredible pull on our health, right down to the cellular level. Let's have a look at these two places here. Okay? And now let's put some trees in them with CGI. Okay, I would give you all a test to do, a really horrible test where you have to subtract 13 from 1,000 and keep subtracting it. Every time you make a mistake, a big horrible bell goes and stresses you out, and then you have to do it again. You have to keep going 13 until you get so stressed, you go, I hate this. And that's called the subjective digital backward test or something like that. They looked at, I'll go back, they looked at 4 different areas, and one of them they showed just horrible, that part there. The second one, they looked at that with trees, but the trees were just delivered in a millisecond, absolute millisecond. So your conscious part of the brain didn't see it, your subconscious occiput did see it. The third one they put the trees and you could see it. And the fourth one, they had the trees and someone explained what those trees were. So someone was sitting next to you. And then they did that horrible tests again and worked out which group did best in the tests afterwards. The group that looked at the concrete, the group that had the subliminal trees, the group that saw the trees, or the group that had someone explaining about the trees. Well, those no trees did worse. So after seeing concrete, their stress levels were slightly raised, and actually they did worse in the test afterwards. The subliminal and the trees and seeing them did the same, which probably tells us that this is something which is inbuilt in us. This is an inherent thing. It's not something we consciously work it out. It's something deep in our brain. And then the people, when there was someone next to you explaining it, well, they did the best. They were the happiest. So their brain was able to function much more. And we know that when you actually have a break of half an hour, if you go and watch a video or play a video game or even read a magazine, there's a certain amount of response that happens. But if you go outside in nature and just go for a walk, your productivity goes up by far the greatest. And if you have someone with you at the time, that will equally go up. And blue is as good as green. Okay, so going out in water is even actually slightly better. This was another one where they looked at all the trees, etc., where people lived, and they looked at income, because obviously people, we say, spend more money. Depression drops hugely with more green space. Stress dropped hugely with more green space. This showed that as we get our world back into that intersection between what we were as a hunter-gatherer to what the main modern life is, get that in between, you start to get this improvement. And actually, children who are brought up in places of stressful events, their stress levels are so much able to cope with more when they've got nature around them. So the more stress a child has, the more impact nature has on dropping that level of stress. And even unborn children, from a child, high blood pressure, that increased every time you were further away from green space. And the birth as well was affected. So there's huge effects that we can see. And this is a kind of more techie slide of type 2 diabetes, all-cause mortality. This is looking at all the studies in the world on nature. And you can see this huge drop there. But we as a country are really bad. That's the average nature connectedness at the bottom, and that's the average perceived well-being index on the left. And you can see that there's a kind of correlation with the best countries in the world of both nature and well-being, Spain and Portugal, and the worst countries, Hong Kong and United Kingdom and California and a bit of Australia. So our nature connectedness is pretty bad in this country. Now, that's an association. It's not a causation. That's an association, but it's a really interesting one. Interestingly, when you go into green space, you make friends. Any of you done any kind of work on going out onto an expedition where you're going out or you're visiting someone, you're doing some gardening with other people, you're doing conservation work, you will notice that suddenly everyone becomes level and they all talk to each other. If you meet in a concrete square, people put their head down and go past each other because the stress levels are slightly higher, just enough to make sure that we move away. And they did some incredible studies in big tower blocks in the States, which showed that people who lived where there was just concrete around exactly the same tower block as another one, and people were allocated randomly to those tower blocks, so there was no choice, there was more domestic violence in those on the 13th floor where there was barren concrete on the ground compared to green space. And nobody really knew who their neighbours were in those concrete ones. And that's because people don't talk to each other as they're walking in and out of the doors, whereas green space seems to. So there's a definite social input that happens when you've got green space. And you feel better. Your health is better as well. Within a kilometre, you've got less health complaints. And for us, that's really important. And then probably what's important for this government, we talk about levelling up. Look at the difference between the high-income people, which are the light blue, and the low-income people, which are the dark blue, death rate is on the left, and that's with little green, some green, more green, very green, okay? So look at the little green amount of green space, that is, not, so green space. The gap between those people in deprived areas dying and those people in affluent areas dying is huge. But look at the top end, very green, that gap is reduced significantly. So what's the way of leveling up? You just make everyone live in a nice green environment. Go to the housing estates and plant them all up. Get green space all around. It's not too far-fetched. A lot of countries have done it. In Bogota, in Colombia, they've done that, and it's had huge effect. France is starting to do it. All the motorways are now becoming linear parks. All sorts of countries are starting to rebuild out the concrete and put green space in there. And then there's green social prescribing, which is happening. So I've just been, in fact, yesterday, I'm on a government committee which is overlooking the green social prescribing, as I mentioned before. And we met yesterday, getting people with mental health problems actually connected towards green space and getting earth in your hands and doing nature really helps to change the alpha waves, which allows the brain to really calm down. That inbuilt hardwiring bit that goes through. And we know that pet therapy is incredibly strong. So the more people are connected to animals, the more, again, their alpha waves, which are the calming waves, affect, and they can start to get that amygdala fear under control and stop it. So that's where we want to be. Total health is not me as a GP seeing you in a place and then that's isolated. It's all about the people around you, and it's all about the place, the nature that's around. Get it into the middle is the really important bit. And things like the green gym. And if you do that, then what tends to happen is that you don't even know you're doing good health. Here's a green gym. Someone had a heart monitor on, and they did aerobics, and they did the green gym. Green gym's conservation work. And after half an hour, you can see that they start to, I don't know what you do in aerobics for the first 20 minutes, but clearly you're just having a chat because nothing is really happening. And with green gym, it's a tool talk. You have to talk about your axes and your bow saws and everything like that. You then do the activity, and then with the aerobics, it came back down again. But the green gym, the woman who was doing this, carried on. She was really enjoying it. For 3 hours, she did cardiovascular training zone of exercise doing conservation work. And then we asked her, what did you do? And she said, well, for the aerobics, it was brilliant. Had a bit of a talk, then I did 25 minutes of really good aerobics. Got my quads sorted out, my abs sorted out, my glutes sorted, really feel good, got a good burn, feel fantastic. Brilliant. What did you do in the green gym? Oh, it's great. We went down to this place, and there was a river. And just on the river, there's some bank, and the voles have gone away, and we've just remodulating the bank. We had to dig away loads of stuff. Then we went up and cleared all this place to make sure butterflies can come back. And I learned so much about anything else. Then we had a cup of tea, and we had some cake there. Then we got back to it, and then we were doing this. And I met some fantastic people. Hang on, what about the glutes and the abs? What about all of those other things in your health? You haven't mentioned any of that. And yet she was doing 3 hours of cardiovascular training, which is pretty tough, as opposed to 25 minutes in aerobics. And all she talked about in the aerobics was about her body. She didn't mention her body once when she talked about the green gym. When you're in nature and you're engrossed with what you're doing, your body's back into autopilot. It doesn't need to worry about health. Health just comes out as a product. We shouldn't need to be talking about health, because health is a product of when we get ourselves right, when we get safe, when we've got purpose, and when we've got a safe and an environment and people around us. Green gym, she had the people around, she felt really safe, she had incredible purpose. The body was absolutely back into where it should be, and all that health was invisible. And that's how we should be doing it. That's how we should be trying to look. And that's why nature therapy and the connection to nature is so, so important. A little plug of a book, which I don't expect you to buy, but just to show this has got some evidence. So the Oxford Nature, Textbook of Nature and Public Health. And that, although I co-edited it with my colleague from Sweden, actually it was 96 professors from around the world putting the top stuff in there. It's really shifted. The evidence now is really strong about how nature affects human beings. So I hope that's helpful. A grand tour of your body and how nature affects. So I'll be very happy to take any questions. If anyone has got anything that they want to mention, talk about, experience, say it's a load of rubbish, anything, or what thing, if you want to just say what thing helped you the most out of that, or what fact you didn't know about. Yeah, I know it's after lunch, but if you've got anything to say, just please, just say it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm intrigued by the slide that you put up about the green gym. I mean, in the army, at its most basic, we thought that well-being is about calories in versus calories out. So make sure you burn what you eat, in essence. Are you saying that being on exercise out for a couple of weeks in the forest is even better than going to the gym and just burning the calories?
Yeah, so
did you hear the question?
I would have been on next door, because my specialty actually is also physical activity and about it. So you're absolutely right. Calories in, calories out is a simple way of looking at it. But as you saw, the type of calorie coming in is really important, and the type of calorie going out is important. So it's slightly more confusing. When you're doing exercise, the biggest impact that physical activity has is an anti-inflammatory. It calms that immune system down. So that's why you don't get diabetes. That's why you don't get heart disease. All those big blobs of adipose tissue are in your visceral fat. Physical activity gets rid of that visceral fat. It targets it. So that's where physical activity is brilliant. It targets the visceral fat, the dangerous fat. You could still be overweight slightly and fit. And, you know, when you've got big, bulky muscles, you can still be, your BMI can be way above. But it's the amount of activity do. And there is a point when your activity levels go up increasingly from doing nothing to doing something, where you get the biggest jump, and then from doing something to be an athlete is a little bit smaller, okay? So it's important. Physical activity, absolutely important. What we're saying here is that when you're physically active, if you're doing it in an area where you're also having purpose and you're enjoying it. Now, if you enjoy the gym and love it, actually that's not a bad thing. That really isn't a bad thing at all, because you're enjoying it, you're getting purpose. But what it's been shown here, that if you're out doing that outdoors and you're connecting yourself to the nature as well when you're running, etc., you get extra benefits. You get extra benefits we didn't know about, and that helps the aging process and other things. It also means, in studies that have been done, that when you're outdoors, you have less perception of exertion. So you don't feel you're doing quite as much work as you do when you're doing it in the gym. So when you're in the gym, you'll do a certain amount. You can do identical amount outside, from a treadmill to an outside, and then you won't feel it quite so much. So that's the other thing. You tend to do more energy, and you tend to do it for longer outdoors as well. So yeah, a little bit of advantage. It's not always possible, obviously, in the middle of a city. But any other, one more question at all? Any other comments? Yeah.
Is this coming to be more apparent?
Is this coming to be more apparent, especially after last year's lockdown and slowly coming back into normality? For the UK, will it be a quick turnaround, or do you reckon there will be a bit of normality with health by the end of this year, or well, not at the end of the year, but in a couple of years' time?
That's a really good question. Are we getting back to normal? So when we had lockdown, the division between those people in more deprived areas, their physical activity levels plummeted. Those people in affluent areas, their physical activity levels went up. We got a widening of inequalities. That's beginning to level. Everyone, though, got more connected to nature. So that was one of the really good things out of the lockdown. People started to go out into their local area, which they hadn't done before. The effect on older people has been pretty dire, and deconditioning, as it's called. But it's not just deconditioning older people, it's in children and it's in adults. That's going to take several years to catch up, to answer your question specifically. For a lot of people, they'll get back quite quickly. But they're the extremes of the young, the more deprived areas, and people who are older. who will have already done some damage, and that's going to take time. And we're seeing it in general practice now of all sorts of things which have been coming out now, which you wouldn't normally have expected to be quite so many. So we've got, I think we've got another couple of years, 2 or 3 years to catch up before we get back to normal.
Yeah, just wanted to ask a question about the microbiome and gut health. I know that medication can also damage the microbiome, and I was wondering, with this kind of research being done, whether there is a movement towards a more holistic approach rather than just for instance, mental health and things like that, because I know when you said about serotonin, dopamine, things like that, whether we're going to move towards improving lifestyle when people are attending the doctors rather than just medicating, if we're moving towards this more holistic approach.
I wish, and I hope, and it will eventually. It's moving, it's definitely moving, but my goodness, it's taking a long time. The very fact the NHS is now doing green prescribing is real good encouragement. The gut biome and mental health, I don't think you'll get any GPs who would be prescribing probiotics to help you with your mental health. That's not there yet. The evidence is building, and the evidence on that is really building strong, that if you look after your gut biome, there's even, and I can say this after lunch, is the fecal transplant as well. So you get basically poo from a healthy person put into someone else. It's dramatic effects. But they're still working out how to make that more palatable, perhaps. I hate the word there. But it shows that when you change your gut biome, your mental health can change almost overnight. It's really dramatic. So I think we'll start to see this. It just takes a long time. And, you can be cynical and say it's all about the pharmaceutical industry promoting all their things, and medicine's very locked in evidence-based, and therefore it takes ages. But I think we're starting to see the NHS and healthcare around the world is struggling, really struggling. And until we start doing exactly as you say, lifestyle, the whole holistic way of looking at someone, we're never going to get anywhere. But it is starting, and the evidence is building, but I'm afraid it's not going to be in the next year. It'll be 2, 3, 4 years' time, I reckon.
It's really
Okay. There we go. Thanks very much indeed. Thanks a lot.